Hello and welcome to the, which podcast is this now? This is the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. That's where we are. Yes, as you might have noticed, Monarda and I have been chatting and laughing and having a good time already. And then we remembered we were going to record a podcast about pleasure herbalism. And warning to start out that when you start getting into the energy of pleasure herbalism, you might lose track of time and you might have so much fun laughing with your pleasure-oriented herbalist friends that things get crazy and wild. And suddenly you might be realizing that you've neglected some important responsibility because you're having so much fun. Hopefully you'll, like remembering what podcast you're recording on or something like that. Luckily, though, the wisdom of the herbs and our inner wisdom seem to awaken us to what needs to be happening before any major crisis comes along. At least that's my experience most of the time. But I just wanted to put a warning out there that grounding is important, especially when we get into the pleasure practices, to remember to really be grounding that in and giving that pleasure back to Mother Earth and really be connected with the seasons and with our body. Especially if pleasure practice is new, it can be very ungrounding, especially because even what's coming up for me to talk about is just to mention is that when we get into the kind of pleasure, like the laughter, the cackling, all of that, it can allow space for, greater feeling of hidden hurts. And when that can come up sometimes into the field of pleasure where it wasn't safe for those hidden hurts to come up previously, when we get into certain energies of pleasure and those hidden hurts can come up, that can be tempting. It can be tempting, or it can be a sort of an unconscious response to unground and to dissociate. So to continually remember to reground and be fully in the pleasure and whatever comes up into the field of pleasure for healing. So I'll just put that as an intention that we can hold for ourselves and for listeners listening in, that as we discuss pleasure herbalism and receive these blessings from the plant realms to activate our pleasure and the fun of being alive, that we can remember that given the nature of most of our lives, that is a very welcome area for our hidden hurts to enter into, and we can tend to them with groundedness. So there we go. That's the introduction for the call today. And I'd love for you, Monarda, to introduce yourself and share what's coming up for you around what I've shared and what's coming up for you in general around pleasure herbalism.
Great. Thanks, Selma. It's good to be here with you and with everybody who's joining. This is something that I've been learning about and practicing for a few years. And really with attention and awareness in the last year, and realizing that it's, as an herbalist, especially for me in my path, this has been here all along, the idea of pleasure. For me, it has been about creating medicine that tastes delicious. That was kind of the entry point for me to becoming somebody who's working with pleasure herbalism. And inspired by a friend of mine who was the person who actually taught me or shared with me that I could grow my own medicine. And this was about 13 years ago. She is a tea maker, and a lot of my tea blends are inspired by her tea blends, which are really very much focused on flavor. our body types are a little bit different. She's more pitta and I'm more vata, so the herbs that we move towards tend to be different. I like physically have an aversion to mint. She uses mint in more of her blends. I use more warming herbs in my blends because that's what my body needs. And that's, I think we can get a little bit more into that later, but noticing where your body moves toward and what you're attracted to is part of pleasure and is part of pleasure herbalism. And I think in the last year, I've been exploring pleasure herbalism, opening it up into creating other preparations that are pleasurable. Most of them still focusing on my taste buds, but as I've been exploring, learning about pleasure on my skin, because the skin is the largest sensory organ of our body. That's a place where I want to move towards, is learning more about how my interest in pleasure herbalism can join my interest in learning about the pleasure palette of my skin. I call it a pleasure palette because I'm just learning right now that it really is a palette, just like my tongue has a palette, my skin very much has a palette. And for a lot of us, we've been raised to suppress the palette of our skin. Mm. And like, I don't know. I'm like remembering a piece from the conversation we just had, Selma, that's like triggering a memory for me about the palette of our skin, but something related to you. But now I can't pinpoint it. I mean, I think even like V-steaming is like a skin, sensation palette, and I haven't explored really the different sensations of using herbs in V-steams. My V-steams, I usually go into a trance state, so I'm not particularly grounded in the sensations of my body to the nuanced point where like I might be able to differentiate between the different herbs and how I'm experiencing sensation. So I'm appreciating the point that you like brought up about staying grounded in pleasure and the relationship with pain, which is something that I've also been exploring. How kink shows up in pleasure and pain, and how kink is actually something that a lot of us are engaged in, whether it's like intellectual kink or emotional kink or physical kink or sexual kink or social kink. Like there's all sorts of different ways, and it is the relationship between pain and pleasure. And so you just opened up a whole nother thing that I hadn't really thought about.
Well, what it brings up for me is, and I hadn't thought of this as anything kinky really, but because my journey with herbalism began, and pleasure herbalism began similar to yours, in that I wanted things to taste good. And if they didn't taste good, it meant that I probably wasn't going to ingest them, right? And so very early on, I learned that alcohol does not taste good to me, unless now I'm getting into honey mead. But when I first, like, intuitively, instinctively, I didn't even know what I was doing. And I ended up making honey mead by like adding water to my honey herb preparations. Like I just somehow thought like that I could just do that, add water to the honey and herbs, because it made it easier to mix it all together, and then I could sit it on the shelf and there was enough honey in there and it would just preserve the herbs, right? And then it would get in the honey and the water was just, made it easier. I had no idea I was making an alcoholic beverage. And I had no idea I should be careful that the jars weren't going to explode in my cabinet, you know? And yet, lo and behold, they didn't explode. Miracle of miracles. But they were bubbling in there all summer long and in my mason jars in the cabinet. And I was like, whoa. And I opened it up at the bad part. And I put it back on the shelf because I didn't want to throw it away because there was all that good honey in there. And then later I opened it up and suddenly it was good. Yeah. In fact, and then later I opened it up again and it was really good. Right? And it just kept getting better. And I had no idea that it was even had a name, what I had made. And these meads were really strong. And then as I connect with my ancestry and my ancestors more, it's become a ceremonial process of making these meads and offering these meads to the ancestors and taking medicinal portions of them. And that tastes good to me. But making alcohol tinctures, I won't take them unless I cook them down and cook the alcohol out and add sweetener or add, to something else to preserve. And so I use glycerin for making my tinctures and honey and meads, and I make my own alcohol because commercial alcohol and organic alcohol is just way too expensive, right? So, and even that hard liquor is I don't like the taste, so I'm not going to take it. It doesn't feel good to me in my body. Maybe that'll change as I ease into it with the meads. I don't know if I'd ever distill a mead, but maybe, I don't know. But so I've always needed to taste good, and my herb teas needed to taste good. Now, back in the beginning, motherwort was out of the picture because it was too bitter, and so was dandelion root. Until I started roasting the dandelion root and making it into dandelion coffee and adding cream and sweetener, nut milks or, vegan milks and things like that. Oh my goodness, that's a whole nother thing. And now motherwort and bitter flavor, so that's changed over time. So there's this, and then as well as like ginger and the hot spicy things, like I don't know if you've ever had cayenne tea, but that's a whole thing too. And so then, so now we're getting into some like pain pleasure kink, right? And like ginger baths, for example, and even cinnamon in your face, topical face mask that's quite hot actually. It can be quite a hot sensation. And then you take it off and your skin's all rosy and like just alive. And taking a ginger bath can be quite intense with the burning sensation. But for me, it's like, it's pleasurable. I can feel the heat of the ginger going into the achy, painful places in my body through my skin. And I want to extend that. And I do ginger compresses for low back pain. So meeting the heat of inflammation with the heat of the herbs and feeling the benefits of that becomes this pleasurable thing. And just like the same with the bitter of the motherwort, meeting the bitter grouchiness inside with the bitterness of the herb becomes this pleasurable meeting, like this joy of meeting that becomes really beautiful. And so I guess, is that kink? I mean, I haven't really associated that kind of thing with kink before.
The way that I describe it is that it's like, I'm trying to open it up because I think that kink is in a category that is very taboo. And in some ways it's, that's fine. Like, and I think that there's probably a lot of people in the kink community, of which I'm not really a part because I'm way off somewhere else, that are fine with it being in a taboo box. But my understanding, and this is coming from an intuitive sense, is that kink is anything that's involving both pleasure and pain. It's like a way that we like are approaching trauma, which is usually very uncomfortable, but we know that trauma healing involves pleasure. That's on the other side of it. And so, things like smoking tobacco, I consider to be kink because it is causing harm and it's causing pleasure. Acupuncture, Pretty
Yes, there, right there. There's the pain, and then
deep massage. You know, I mean, it's like binge watching movies. You know, like there's all sorts of things that I think are kinky actions because they're have this dual function in our body. And when we get a little bit more intentional with how we use the pain and pleasure combo, that's when the trauma cycle is complete. And in my mind, that's, you know, in my mind, pleasure herbalism, when I started thinking about pleasure herbalism as something, I wasn't thinking about kink and how that plays into it. I realized that for a lot of people, actually claiming our pleasure is kink because it's uncomfortable. And so for me, the pleasure herbalism is reclaiming the colonized pieces of our body, our tongue, our palate, our relationship with plants that have diverse qualities that we weren't raised with, like the bitters and the pungents, and for some of us, the spices, astringents, right? Like, you know, it's like the astringent feeling in the mouth can be really uncomfortable because it's so tightening. But being able to experience the full spectrum of these sensations that our bodies have evolved with experiencing is reclaiming part of what it means to be human. And for me, the pleasure piece is really important. Like you said, I want my medicine to taste good and I want to feel good when I'm taking it. I'm not particularly into to using medicine that doesn't taste good or feel good going down. There are some times when I need to consume medicine that doesn't taste good or feel good going down, but generally I'm moving toward enjoying it. And I think part of that is because that's what the plants want. The plants want us to have relationships that nourish us. They don't want us to, you know, be experiencing like complex, you know, pain, pleasure relationships with them. At least generally. I mean, there, you know, there is a spectrum, but most of the plants that I hang out with just want to be loved and appreciated and seen, like everything that a human wants to. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's interesting as I'm saying this, linking trauma, and it's like, oh yeah, actually, the plants also have experienced traumatic relationships in the way that humans have been disconnected from them. And part of their trauma healing, like that they're asking us for, is to be seen and loved and appreciated and desired.
Well, you know, as you're saying all this, what I'm realizing is that, you know, this whole pleasure, pain continuum, and what tastes good to me at any given time has changed, given on my changing needs, desires, degree of reclamation, all of that, and healing process. And the same is true for you. And what tastes good to me right now might not taste good to me 6 months from now. And it might or might not taste good to you at any given time or ever. And so, so that it's, you know, I have that on my website where I say, you know, I try to make things that taste good, but what tastes good to me. And I can tell that right away. Like when I tell, you know, a student or a client about a recipe that I love, like for example, ginger vinegar, okay? Two very strong flavors that are right for my body. So it tastes good to me, even though it's intense. it's like that, oh yes, kind of intense, right? It's like meeting this need. I blend up fresh ginger in vinegar, in apple cider vinegar, and I take a spoonful of that and chew it up and swallow the vinegar and swallow the ginger before eating, and it really gets my digestion going, which feels fantastic for me. And it tastes good in a bad kind of way for me, you know, which is very different than alcohol. Alcohol, I just would never do it, like hard alcohol. Other people, that hard alcohol tastes good in a bad kind of way, and they love it, and they're going to be better off with alcohol tinctures, and they're going to actually take them, whereas I will not. Whereas with the ginger vinegar, I can tell when I describe that to somebody and they're going, like, that is way beyond what would be anything that, you know, there's some part of them that degree of intensity in those flavor directions are not going to produce an ultimate pleasure response, right? Whereas they instead might put the ginger in honey, for example, or in water with lemon and honey, and to get the similar benefits of the acid and the properties of the ginger and the heat of the ginger, and then the sweet and the probiotic qualities of the honey, instead of going for all those same things in the vinegar at a different intensity level, right? So then they're going to go for that, and that's going to taste good to them. And maybe one day they're going to be like, where have you been all my life, when they finally taste the ginger vinegar, right? Just similar to my process of where have you been all my life when I finally did the ginger vinegar, you know? Just like in our relationships and in our sensual sexual play, there's going to be different needs and desires and different preferences, and there's going to be different relationships that are good for us at different times and not at other times. It's the same with the herbs, that's going to evolve for us over time, and we can suddenly discover ourselves having these desires that we never had before, for intensity of sensation and experience that are surprising to us. Or, you know, and so what I want to encourage people listening and ourselves is to just recognize and claim the changeability, so that, you know, instead of proclaiming, if I had decided that back when in my 20s that I didn't like bitter and I was never going to like bitter, I would never have in my 40s given motherwort another taste to discover that she's my best friend, and that she's really going to help me, and she's satisfying a deep need I didn't even know that I had. Right. And so if I had stuck to what it was back then, 20 years ago, right, however long. And so I just want to claim that mutability for those of us who have those qualities, that we might evolve and change over time. Now, that degree of mutability and changeability in people's tastes is going to be different for different people. I know we can talk about different astrological influences, where some people are much more fixed, and that's how they are, and that's how they're always going to be. I know I have a couple of friends that are having 6 and more planets in Leo, and boy, it's just has to be that same way every single time, and we can't even really be in the same room together because my mutability is just too irritating to them, you know. And they're rigid. It has to be the same way every single time. Everything has to be the same every single minute of every single day. Is just like, ugh, how can you live with yourself, you know? And so we're not a compatible combination of people, and, you know, things that taste good to me aren't going to taste good to them, and it might not ever change for them, you know. So recognizing all of these and permitting and allowing for these differences between us, and these changes that might occur within us, I think is one of the essential steps in claiming our pleasure, especially with herbalism, you know, because it has definitely evolved for me, and I've really befriended bitter to a degree that I never would have thought was possible. And spicy ginger. I couldn't do ginger vinegar before, and now it's like, get some more vinegar at the store, honey. Get some more ginger at the store.
And, you know, I think one thing that's coming up right now for me, Sama, is that, you know, this piece about intensity and how that's related to the pleasure. It reminds me about how I wasn't able to have intense sensual experiences, of which the tongue, I can have a sensual experience in my tongue, right? Sensual means sensory. When I was, you know, when I was still in active trauma, daily, weekly, monthly, before even early on, when after I had decided I'm going to heal my old wounds, I wasn't able to do the intense sensory experiences. And part of that, and so I just want to make it clear that people who are really experiencing a lot of trauma may not be able to eat really spicy food. Some people who are experiencing, you know, lots of trauma definitely go towards spicy food, and that's fine. So, but it's just that when we're in, when trauma is such an like when we're struggling with regulation, it's not necessarily the time to explore new sources of pain.
Might not be, yeah.
Even if there's pleasure on the other side of it. If you're feeling called to that, great. But, you know, I think one of the things, another thing that I wanted to point out is that for me, the link between pleasure and pain, I'm not going for the pain, I'm going for the pleasure. And I realize that sometimes pain is part of the journey to get to the pleasure. And the way that I'm able to do that is by being present for the journey. Again, like, disassociating from the pain is something that I did my whole life that allowed me to get to the pleasure. But I wasn't actually able to get to the pleasure because I was disassociated from the pain, disassociated from the pleasure, but still trying to keep getting there because all of us want to experience pleasure. The other piece is just reminding people that this journey is really about finding what's true and right for my body, tapping into the intuition. This is a body-led experience. Pleasure herbalism, sensual herbalism. What is my body being called to? What does my body have an aversion to? Like I mentioned mint earlier. I have like this balm that has hot and mint on it, and it just does not feel good for my body. I just don't even need to go there, right? Like, so this is one experience where I use discretion. I just don't want to use mint unless it's 90 degrees out and 90% humidity. I'm not using mint because it's not right for my body. Even though it's uncomfortable, the pleasure, it doesn't bring the pleasure. So, and so this is like one of the things that I tell people is, what are you already being attracted to? And just deepen into the pleasure of what you're already doing. If you're using herbs, how can you deepen your pleasure, your sensory experience, and to appreciate those a little bit more? And I really appreciated at the beginning, Salma, the grounding practice. Because for me, as somebody who works with plants when they're alive, that's also a sensory pleasure experience, touching the soil, connecting with the soil, being in the rain, you know. So it's not, pleasure herbalism isn't just putting herbs into our body, right? It's finding pleasure in the spaces where herbs are in our lives.
You know, and that's where we were getting all giddy at the beginning before we started the recording, I think, because we were talking about going out during the dormant season of plants and seeing them all naked with no leaves, dead branches, and knowing that there's this magic still happening under the soil, and being able to recognize them in all their forms and evolutionary processes, or I don't know if that's the right term, but in all the phases of their life. Um, and having that kind of an intimate relationship with the herbs and recognizing that for a moment. You know, I was sharing about a friend saying, hey, we'll go on an herb walk. And I was initially saying, well, you know, I don't know if this is the best time of year for an herb walk. And then I was realizing, wait a second, this is a really great time of year for an herb walk, because look, this, did you know this is what this herb looks like when it's totally dormant and when everything is died back and the leaves are all brown and it's just got this seed pod dangling in the air, giving seeds to the earth, you know, and the seeds getting eaten by critters and feeding the community, and connecting with the plant at this phase of its life is appreciating the crone, the wise crone inside of us that's so nourishing for our community, and you know, draws her energies within and holds her energies within whilst still managing to feed the community with rich nourishment, you know. And so the pleasure of recognizing that intimacy with the plant world, that it doesn't need to be this lusciously blooming flower in order to have a beauty, an exquisite beauty and value. It doesn't need to be something that I would even harvest right now and take home with me. It can be something that is a living being in an ecosystem that's nourishing me just by being there and communing with me. And there's a palpable sense of connectedness and pleasure that I'm becoming more and more aware of as a long-term gardener and herbalist. You know, I mean, I have dissuaded unwanted attentions from drunken males in my community by just being totally overwhelmed with pleasure at the plants on the side of the road as they're trying to like kind of stalk me and engage me. And I'm like, oh my God, did you see this plant? Did you see this plant? Oh my goodness, look at what this plant is doing. And they completely lose interest in me because I'm this crazy plant lady, right? Yep. So this is a thing, but it's real, it's genuine, you know. There's this connection, this joy, and you know, I have similar trouble with my husband where it's like, okay. Yeah. I try to like, you know, and he's learning to feel it. He's definitely, it's rubbing off on him. Don't you worry.
I can relate. The kids definitely can get bored with but then I see my kids and their fluency around herbs and medicine and how to use, it's just like, they don't even they don't understand the wisdom that they have. Yeah. And how needed it is. It's just secondhand to them that they know so much. It's hilarious.
And they're feeling a lot of the pleasure with you as kids, I'm imagining. You're transmitting the pleasure, and it's just sort of the water they're swimming in. And can we go do this other thing now, Mom? Where you're still just like drinking it in and with it, you know.
They need to play it with their bodies. Yeah.
Oh, well, again, I'll just reiterate what we said before we even started the recording. One of these days, Monarda, we're going to go on an herb walk together, and the world won't see us again for, I don't know, we'll probably disappear into the land of herbs, and, you know.
Oh, before we get off, I want to just, oh my goodness. I went on an herb walk with this new friend who is a plant person but doesn't identify as an herbalist because she doesn't feel like she can claim that, which is pretty common. She's a native Anishinaabe woman living near me, and she just goes out and takes pictures. Like, she doesn't even harvest. And going out with her, it was really beautiful to witness her process of connecting with the plants, because it's different from mine, right? Like usually when I go out, I'm in harvest mindset, which is appreciating the plants in a different way. And it was just, it was amazing how different it felt being with somebody who appreciated them as they were and wasn't thinking about picking them or coming back and harvesting or making medicine. But while we were out, we saw, let's see, is it a pitcher plant? Maybe it's a plant that's carnivorous, and it was like budding up out of the snow, and it's bright red, and it's got lips. Oh my goddess, it was so beautiful. And so I'm gonna put a picture of it on my next blog. Talk about pleasure herbalism though. This plant, and there was the flowering seed stalk. The seed pod was gorgeous, and my friend was saying, you should see it when it flowers. And I'm like, I don't need to see it. I mean, I will, but like, it's amazing right now. It was so pretty. So I'm excited to share that piece of the plant walk with you and everybody else.
Oh, beautiful. The visual pleasures of it too. And even like I was saying, you know, in the dormant season right now, just yesterday with a friend, you know, stopping for a moment and saying, wait a second, we are on an herb walk right now. And these dead stalks of, you know, with the shape and the movement of the dead stalks and the color of the seed pods that are there. And, you know, the yellow dock seed pods have this rich color that stands out against the gray brown, gray beige of everything else. But then the shapes of the chicory dead stalks dancing through the air and arching out. And I mean, if you just stop for a moment, you know, that's what her request for an herb walk stopped me for a moment and said, wait, here we are on an herb walk and connecting with the beauty of everything as it is right now. You know, is just such a wonderful source of pleasure in the moment that we can all, I think, apply at any point in our lives.
Yeah, really. I mean, you don't even have to know what these plants are, but you could take pictures and post them on the
there we go.
on the Facebook page, and we could have a pop-up plant walk. That'd be fun.
There we go. Right. So let's make that an official invitation. If anyone is listening to this episode and feeling like exploring pleasure herbalism, and go out and you decide to go out on a walk somewhere, perhaps in your garden, perhaps elsewhere, and you want to take some pictures of plants that whatever phase they're in, they don't have to be lusciously blooming. They could be peeking up through the snow with a dried out crinkled branch or seed pod that's you know, they could be barely new little shoots of green. That's one of my favorite, is at the bottom of the old dead branches there could be just new little baby shoots of green coming up from the very roots. That is like, oh, the baby's coming up. You know, there's so much pleasure to be had by simply observing and witnessing. And even if you don't know what the plant is, if you want to take some photos of your pleasure herbalism, your pleasure plant connections, then please post them in the Womb Centered Healing Temple Facebook group. You can tag myself and Monarda if you want to call our attention to it. So I'm Sama Morningstar and this is Monarda Thrasher, and we're both in that group and quite active there and paying attention to what's going on. So tag us if you want to take photos and share your pleasure herb, and maybe even a video, and we can all discuss the beauty of and the pleasure in the plant connection that you're making and share in that pleasure. Because I find it grows exponentially when we share it. I mean, we start cackling and like, you know, having the whole thing. We forget where we are. Okay. Like we were at the beginning. I didn't even remember the name of the podcast. So
Thanks, Sama, and thank you everyone.
Monarda. Yeah. All right. So hope to see you all there. And and enjoy and share in our pleasure herbalism together very soon. All right, that's all for now. Until next time.